SimCity from EA and Maxis is here, and wow, where to begin? Do I start off by talking about the server issues that plagued this game for nearly a week since its launch, and thus place it at a more botched launch than Diablo 3? Or do I just gloss over all of that and talk about the game and the issues I have with it? It's a difficult decision. Obviously, the server issues had a huge role in turning many people away from the game. From the day it launched to this past Friday, I and my SimCity pals were only able to connect twice and play for any length of time. Granted, once we were in, we were able to play for hours at a time, but that doesn't really change the fact that it took multiple hopeful attempts in between these game sessions before we were able to actually play the game. Since Friday evening, however, I've been able to connect whenever I wanted to. I just hope that continues to be the case. As a matter of full disclosure here, EA did provide me with a review copy of SimCity. However, unlike other media outlets, I did not receive this review copy until later in the day on the game's initial North American launch. That means I wasn't afforded the luxury of private online sessions, free of connection troubles, authenticated server outages, or server queues. I experienced the same game as everyone else right out the gate. As I'm starting to type up this review, Lucy Bradshaw from Maxis Games is doing a live Q&A session on Twitter. This past Friday, she also took to revealing that anyone with an activated copy of SimCity will receive a free game from the EA catalog. Specifics on which game will be offered have not yet been revealed, though. While the outlook sounds hopeful from a PR standpoint, we're not living in the future. We're living in the here and the now, and that is what we're going to review. Server issues aside, SimCity is actually a fairly enjoyable game. Now, I never really got into the older SimCity titles. I've played them here and there, but they never really struck my fancy. When this new one was announced, I was sorta meh about the whole thing. Truth be told, the only reason I started to change my mind about wanting the game is thanks to the multiplayer aspect of it all. The idea of playing SimCity with some buddies sounded like a really cool prospect. Initially, ideas of sabotaging neighbors by placing landfills or nuclear plants on the borders were a couple of the evil ideas we had tossed around. That was before we came to understand that cities are miles apart in this game. It was also before we realized just how small the city areas were, but we'll come back to that in just a moment. After making your way through the game's tutorial, one that will pop up anytime you go to a new server location, you're free to start building a city of your own. Select a region or play by yourself in normal or sandbox mode, join up with some friends in a private region, or hit up any of the many public regions available. Claim a plot of land to start your city and have at it. Each city tends to follow a rather similar plan of attack from the start. First, build a road that connects your city to the outside world. Then, designate a little residential area, maybe a little commercial area, and a little industrial area so your citizens have a place to work. From there, it's plunking down a power source, water source, and then town hall. If it's your first city, you don't have much money to work with here, so you'll want to keep things in check for a while unless you take out some bonds first thing. After the basics are taken care of, the sky is almost the limit. Yes, there are things to take note of when placing these specific zoning areas down. You will need to factor in the wind when placing industrial, because if air pollution blows over a residential area, a lot of people are going to end up getting sick. Similarly, when placing a water pump, you will want to make sure that you place it over an area that has an abundance of clean groundwater. Otherwise, it will quickly run dry and you will have to place another one somewhere else. From there, it's almost business as usual as far as SimCity games go. You will need to ensure that roads are of adequate size to handle a growing population and visitors. Larger roads mean less traffic jams and thus easier routes for your fire trucks, police, and ambulance to navigate, as well as having quick access for the Sims to get to shops and to work. Here lies the first problem. For as much as the new Glassbox engine was promoted for having such advanced AI mechanics, you really don't see that at play here. Drivers will often take the shortest route from point A to point B. This is a problem when roads begin to get completely backed up, and instead of taking alternate roads that are nearby, they will sit in traffic and end up taking longer to get somewhere than if they made a quick turn and took the empty 3-lane avenue that's right next to them. This issue also applies to city services such as fire, police, and ambulances. Often these vehicles will queue up right behind one another. This is especially apparent when fires break out and you see a fire truck tackling one blaze while another sits behind it simply waiting to get to the fire just down the road. They will wait until the first truck moves, at which point they will both then move onto the second fire, repeating the process. It's as if they're moving as a herd from one problem to another. Unlike in real life, those traveling by car will not get out of the way of police, fire trucks, or ambulances. Everyone follows the same rules of the road no matter what. Yeah, I've sat and stared, quietly pondering why these cars don't get out of the way of the fire truck while an apartment building burns to the ground just a block away. It's simply astonishing watching this happen because when it does, your citizens will start to protest about how they don't have adequate service coverage, even though you should have plenty to go around. Improvements to the series do include curved roads. That's where the road improvements end. There are no apparent over or underpass placement, no off or on ramps, etc. There are sometimes handy snap guides for street placement. The problem here is that these guides don't always account for future growth. If you stick to the guides, you may find that businesses would like to expand or grow, but they can't, because there just isn't enough space in between the roads laid out that would allow them to do so. On the topic of roads, the guides are both amazing and probably the worst thing I've ever encountered. The game will often draw guidelines or inclines or areas that you simply cannot build roads. Other times, the roads will not properly align to the guide you're trying to follow, instead snapping to another section that's nearby but not exactly where you wanted. And God help you if you want to build a straight road and try to connect it close to an existing intersection. Tunnels are built only when the game feels like doing it. Probably the most frustrating issue I had was when a road was unable to be built between two roads if even one of those other roads has a steep incline along it at any point. It doesn't matter that the area you're presently trying to create a road on is completely flat. Oh no, it won't let you connect those two roads. You can come close, but as soon as they connect, that road can't be placed. You don't know the meaning of infuriating until you run into that particular situation. Well, maybe I should just change up the terrain in an area and smooth things out, right? Nope, you can't do that in this game. There are times where you can place a road or building and the game will adjust the terrain slightly, oftentimes resulting in some rather odd visual glitches, including, but not limited to, missing surfaces, texture stretching, and odd terrain deformation. Sometimes when placing a road, it will go for a bit automatically, deforming the terrain, and then suddenly have a tiny bit with a tunnel for no apparent reason. It honestly just doesn't make much sense. It also doesn't make much sense to include this type of terrain and not include the ability to manually terraform the landscape. In some cases, you're severely cutting back on your usable land area beyond the already small city sizes. Placement of buildings is also quite hit or miss. Some buildings you know for sure will work in an area and have no trouble putting them down. Others will sometimes feature boundaries indicating areas you can expand upon in the future, so be sure to include enough space for those. Still others will not include those expanded boundary boxes, or their initial boundary box is incorrect. Yes, this certainly causes some placement issues when buildings that seem like you should be able to place simply cannot be put down. That is, they can't be placed until you clear out some additional room that you were not aware that you needed. The difficulty also seems a bit sketchy. At the start, there's a mad dash to get things set up to try and meet the needs of your residents. As the time goes on, the entire city seems to just sit on autopilot. There will come a point where there just isn't anything more you can really do outside of wait for money to come in or try and start a new neighboring city from scratch. You really won't be able to completely satisfy the needs of every zone with just one city, there just isn't enough room. You then go and you start a new city in your region. The problem with this is the cities are quite a distance apart. If you start a region that has, say, 16 cities in it, there will be 4 groups of 4 cities each. Those 4 groups have no quick access to the other groups in the region, meaning until water or air trade routes are established, there is no way to work with your neighbors outside of your immediate vicinity. Sure, technological and service advancements do work on a region-wide basis, but given the server issues, they were not perfectly synced up most of the time my friends and I were trying to play. Someone would say they researched one thing and it would gradually pop up on the rest of our games between 5 and 20 minutes later. At a few points, I was able to modify cities I didn't own, though the changes apparently didn't save once I left. At another point, I was stuck in a loop going back and forth between 2 cities I didn't own, unable to get back to the region view to return to my own cities. I had to quit and relaunch the game. Other times I was stuck perpetually loading into a city I was trying to visit. I would like to think that last issue is merely a side effect of the recent server issues, however. I dislike the fact that if I have cities spread across more than one area in a 16-city region, and a friend needs help in a section where I'm not currently active, I have to first load into a city in the area he's in and then provide him with assistance. I can't just tell the game to send him vehicles from another one of my own cities that is closer to his location. I actually have to back out to region view, click on my other city, load it up, go back out to region view, give him what he needs, then load back into my other city I was trying to take care of in the first place. I also dislike the fact that SimCity has its own launcher. If you're going to have a game that requires Origin, update through Origin. Don't make me launch something else that will then update the update and make me restart the launcher from Origin. You know, you get my idea. Just update through Origin. don't have a separate launcher. The Sims 3 has this, which is really annoying, but I can forgive that because I believe that game came out before Origin was, really, getting the ball rolling. But SimCity has no excuse for that. Stop it. It's a lot of little stuff like that that really adds up over time. The lack of road options, the sometimes broken road guides, the horrific AI and pathing, the troublesome building placement, the lack of terraforming, and often a lack of information. There are some warnings and notices that your advisors will warn you about, and when you go to look for the issue, it's nowhere to be found. A simple changing of color or a blinking red light over a troubled spot would be welcome. Sure, this system is in place and works fine for things like water or power, but for other services, it is not quite as apparent. For instance, one of my early towns apparently had some issue where a streetcar stop wasn't connected properly. For the life of me, I could not find the issue, but without fail, I would get a warning about it every 2 minutes. From my repeated visual inspections, I simply could not find any issue, but the game repeatedly told me otherwise. Now, I just spent however many minutes with a laundry list of complaints about the game, so obviously I'm going to give this game an absurdly low score, right? Not quite. For as much as I complain about the game, their complaints amass over probably 12 hours of a city simulation game. Sure, there are lots of them, and yes, they do add up, but for the rest of the time, I couldn't help but have, wait for it, yes, fun. Yeah, crazy, right? Even with all of these problems and some features stripped out from the previous games, I couldn't help but have a great deal of fun with this game. Watching as my cities grew, citizens moved in, shops pop up overnight, skyscrapers start reaching towards the skies, watched in horror as a coal shortage resulted in a power outage which took down all critical utilities, and I make a mad dash to get assistance from my neighbors. My first thoughts about the game were that it reminded me a lot of that SimCity social game that was or still is on Facebook. In the brief time I toyed with that game, I enjoyed it. The social aspect really carries over now to SimCity's latest release, even when I'm not playing. Like right now, I just had someone IM me over Steam requesting help for garbage pickup and essential service vehicles. Visually, I think the game looks great, with the exceptions made to the visual oddities I described earlier. The tilt-shift visual bullet point is kind of neat and can be adjusted or disabled based on your personal preferences. For some reason, the game defaults to being locked at 30 frames per second at the start, but that can be increased or decreased, or, outright disabled if you so prefer. There are also some colorblind graphical options and other filters. Some filters are a bit hard to play with since they tend to wash out zoning colors, but they do make for some great looking screenshots. The sound is also another solid highlight of the game. The music is largely forgettable though, but it fills in the background noise role nicely. It's often soothing, though it was a bit too loud on the default settings for my personal liking. Cities do come alive with the incoherent words of protesters shouting in Simlish outside your city hall, the glug of water flowing through the city when looking at the water table, the blaring sirens of the idiotic firefighters, and, well, the list goes on. Those who are fans of achievements should be happy to hear that SimCity has plenty of them for you to try and earn. They pop up smack dab in the middle of your screen in a little bubble and disappear with a quick click. Naturally, at the time I'm writing this, the achievement and leaderboards for the game have been disabled while they continue to iron out the server issues. But I mean, they're there, or well, they will be once the functionality is restored at some point down the line. There is a lot of potential here. If Maxis can finish up fixing these server issues, perhaps they can then focus on creating some worthwhile free updates that address some of the bigger complaints players have with the game, and make the game something that is truly great all the time, instead of something that merely has flashes of brilliance. I view SimCity as a game I simultaneously love to hate, and one that I hate to love. This is by far the most difficult review I've had to do here, trying to weigh my enjoyment against the numerous issues, bugs, and odd design choices I've come across. I really don't know what that says either about me or about the game, that even with those issues, I still managed to find a great deal of fun and enjoyment here. It's like I'd scratch my head at something that happened and go, what the hell? Yet I'd continue playing for another 2 hours before I knew it. To put a number to this game is extremely difficult. I want to score it high because of the fun and the hours I've gotten out of it so far, but then I'm reminded of the little things that irritate me that really should bring the score down quite a few notches, that if they were in another game that wasn't as fun, those would be the dominating factor here. As it is, a happy compromise will have to be made, and well, that'll be reflected in the score you see at the end. Perhaps down the line I will revisit SimCity, not to alter my score like some sites, but perhaps to review it a second time, as if this review never existed. Or, maybe I'll offer just not another review, but to see if any of these complaints have been addressed, and if the game still holds up after however long of a period it ends up being. I hope you enjoyed this review for SimCity. As always, this has been Zips for TGN and CSN. We'll catch you next time.